Hello, everyone. It looks like most folks have successfully connected to audio, so welcome. My name is Kim Wallace, and I work in the Alumni and Parent Engagement Office, and it is a pleasure for me to host this event today with some of our wonderful alumni working in the worlds of marketing and digital advertising, and we hope that you'll find today's conversation fruitful. We have a number of other programs, both career-oriented and faculty presentations and all sorts of things upcoming that you can find on our website. So we hope you'll check those out as well. But without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Elly.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to see your faces and names on here. I'm Elly Moody, Deutch Moody. I am in class of 2008. I was a studio art and anthropology major, and I have a great list of colleagues here that have all come out of Kenyon that have wonderful insights around marketing, digital, and advertising, and insights to share with you. So I'm going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our questions. And please feel free to chime in throughout the session if you have any questions by entering your question in the chat or raising your hand through the reaction feature, or we'll have time at the end for us all to connect and answer some live questions as well. So without further ado, on the panel, Adam, do you want to kick us off since you're the first name I'm seeing?
Sure. I'm Adam Kleinman. I was class of 06, and I am the Senior Vice President and General Manager of the NERF and Sports Action business, which includes Super Soaker.
Brian, please go next.
I'm Brian D'Orazio. I am class of 08, just like Elly. I am currently the Digital Marketing Manager at Tactile Medical, and I was a double major in history and Spanish.
Thanks, Brian. Geoffrey, how about you?
I'm Geoffrey DeStefano. I was actually class of 87, and I was an international studies major, and I run my own company, which is a Hollywood studio for brands called Brand Programming Studios.
Great. Lauren, last but not least.
I am Lauren Keiling, also class of 08 with Elly and Brian, and I am currently the Senior Director of Brand Strategy and Content Insights at ESPN.
All right, thanks everyone. I have the pleasure of getting to moderate this panel. I am currently the Customer Care Strategy Manager at McDonald's, and I live in the Chicago area, actually where I grew up in Evanston, and hopefully you guys are all staying warm and safe at home. I see a lot of faces all over, but we do want to just say thanks again for joining, and we're going to get into our discussion here. So I'm going to throw this out there, and panelists, please chime in, whoever would like to answer first. But talking marketing, digital innovation, insights, how do you focus around that at your job today and what you're doing?
All right, I'll go first.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam.
I would say it's a little bit of everything. So for us, we always center around the consumer. We have a brand blueprint that's built around the consumer. Everything we do starts with the consumer and insights around the different consumers that we go after, from the youngest kids to the oldest fans. And then from there, it's really sort of like, how do we execute against everything? So we've got product development, which is all about innovation. We've got marketing, which is all about reaching the consumer on different platforms around the world. So I would say at Hasbro, it's not just one thing. Our objective is to make sure that wherever the consumer is and however the consumer wants to engage with our brands, for me, that's NERF and Super Soaker, that we are building the products and the experiences, and that can be, location-based entertainment, that can be partnerships with the biggest brands in the world, to bring our brands to life in the ways that every consumer would want to see them. So it's a little bit of everything for us at Hasbro.
I think I'll jump in because I'll build off of that, is that I think there's tremendous disruption in the media space. As we know, from the onslaught of the streaming services, it's really how do brands communicate and reach their audience. And so we help brands really think through that, and how do you, and we sort of come at it from a television programming model. And programming for us always has two definitions. It's creative curation and development, but it's also the zeros and ones, the digital architecture that reaches them. And so the platforms become sort of brand conduits, and we really focus on how do we take advantage of this new media ecosystem in order to build, maintain, and monetize audiences for brands.
I love when
can
those
jump-
zeros and ones come in. Yeah, Lauren, what about you?
I can jump in off that because I think my job is definitely combining a lot of the things that Adam and Geoffrey both spoke about. Working sort of in a research function, I am lucky enough to kind of be the voice of that consumer that Adam talked about, the voice of that fan, and also trying to figure out ways in which we can insert ourselves into the current fan journey and every iteration of that, as Geoffrey mentioned, because things are shifting so drastically. And he also mentioned brands. That's actually another part of my role as well. I lead brand strategy, and I think some people are like, what the heck is brand strategy? I think when it comes down to it, it's how do people actually feel when they say the name of your company or your product, and how does that actually lead to business? So my 2 cents on that.
And that's fascinating, Lauren, because I think feelings and emotions really do play a big part in the marketing world, and the trust that consumers have with their businesses that they choose to, put their money forward into. So, Brian, what about you? Or Geoffrey, go ahead if you want to chime in.
I was going to build on that. It's interesting in this day and age. One of my colleagues did one of the foremost studies on fandom, and we talk a lot with our clients about fandom and how do you do it, because it goes beyond just brand love or brand belief, or and it's really about, and the brands that are really successful with it can really weather the storm or really go to a higher level. Because okay, so I'm from Chicago. If I'm walking up the Spanish Steps in Rome and I see somebody with a Blackhawks jersey on, I'm high-fiving them all the way. I don't know that person from Adam, right? But it's that fandom that connects us. And then especially since we've all been so isolated in this day and age, I think from a consumer point of view, it's really important that brands reach out and connect with their communities and connect with consumers and give their marketing a sense of purpose, where they're actually giving back to the community that they're actually selling the product to, whether it's a service or a product, or in ESPN's point of view, programming, right? Content. So I think that fandom is really important, and the brands that nail it, have a great trajectory.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's where that loyalty and retention comes in. So that fandom is not only just a feeling, but actually, obviously, dollars and cents that adds to your bottom line for your business. Mm-hmm. Brian, what in your digital world at Tactile Medical, what is that like, and how do you focus on bringing the next best thing in digital to your company?
So it's interesting. So I think me and Adam share some similarities, because my end user isn't my purchaser. So like he's promoting a super soaker that needs to appeal to a child so that he can go to his mom or dad and be like, or the cool aunt and uncle and be like, I need this, I gotta have it. Our products are wildly different, but it's a similar mindset that I need to please the patients, but also promote it to the clinicians so that they can actually prescribe it and know who we are. So I think a lot of it is providing like the relevant, timely information in a package that's useful for them. So like I run our email and our social and our website. So how do I make the best customer experience for a doctor to be as easy as possible for them to come onto our site, get exactly what they need, and then leave? Like I want to make it as frictionless as possible, because I want them to move through as quickly as possible.
And Brian, in that B2B space, social is such an interesting channel to be connecting with doctors on. How do you find the right audience to target your content to, and really make sure that you're reaching that consumer?
Yeah, it's fun because LinkedIn is crushing it for us right now. It's so good. It also allows just so much like boosted posting to just get hyper targeted on everyone. But at the end of the day, these are all people. So they're still on Facebook, they're still on Twitter, they're on Instagram. I'm trying to push for TikTok for some of our people, because we have a really engaging like physical therapist that does a lot of stuff for us, and she runs one of our Instagram accounts, and she's awesome. I think her content would play on TikTok. Getting that buy-in has been an uphill battle, because I think people just default to we're B2B, so we shouldn't do it. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in the B2B space to present a human touch to everything that we're doing.
Agree more.
It's interesting. We did a big project for a medical device called Omnipod, which is a tubeless insulin delivery device. And again, that was one of the things that we had to solve was how do you talk to the clinicians and the healthcare professional group at the same time that you're talking to consumers, because it's a big step and it's a big part of their life. And if you're a diabetic, it's extremely complicated, right? But talking to both and creating content that talks to both at the same time. And we had to create a whole different kinds of content in order to talk to the two different audiences. And it was pretty successful, but it's your challenge is it's a big challenge.
What are some of the biggest challenges you guys have faced in your career? Speaking of challenges.
I mean, I'll jump in and say right now, I think the biggest challenge is the disruption of COVID. Whether that's on, we make physical products and the, shifting an entire business from being in the office and testing things out to what a digital version of that looks like, all the way down to supply chain and how do you meet consumer demand, understanding that costs have changed significantly, timing has changed significantly, and we, didn't necessarily have those timelines built in from the beginning. So for us, it's really been about how do we, shift very quickly? How do we relook at our schedules? How do we relook at our processes to make sure that when the consumer is going to purchase, they don't see the disruption that maybe we see on our side.
Anyone else?
I'll speak from a bit of a more personal angle. I think coming from a place like Kenyon and just education in general, the corporate world is not so idyllic or supportive or open in some ways. So I think figuring out how to navigate that corporate world and having a balance of really feeling like you have the person-to-person connection and a community around you versus politics and money and finance, and we were joking about legal before, things that come along with the business world. I think that's something that I've had to learn over the course of many years.
I think one of the biggest things building on that is finding mentors and reaching out to people, and you have to sort of put aside your inhibitions and reach out to people and find people that you will that will spend some time with you. And sometimes you have to stay on top of people. Like I've got a few mentors that, I spent 2 years just every once in a while touching base, like, hey, this is what I just did. What are you doing these days? And eventually people will open up, and finding those right people, I think, can help give you guidance. It's that sort of kitchen counter, sort of cabinet group, so that you're not just listening to people that are your peers or who you're, in business with at the time, but it's that outside perspective, I think, can really help as you develop your careers or break into an industry, is building those relationships. And that just takes, a little bit of tenacity, a little bit of charm, but a lot of smart thinking and just really trying to reach out to people and find people and search people for people that can give you advice. Not that they have, look for people that don't have a stake in the game. It's one thing to be talking to your boss or a boss about, you're trying to get a promotion or something like that. It's another thing with somebody who's totally outside the company. Well, this is what I'm facing. What do you think I should do? And I think that if somebody doesn't have a stake in the game, it really ends up being great advice.
So these are all really great. I think from a very in the weeds answer is data integrity. I work with data all of the time because I know what's working, what's not working. And if you don't have clean data, you can't really get a good solution or an accurate answer. And then if you're taking over a role or coming into a new role, how things were measured previously and how they're measured now might not be the same. So if you're looking year over year and no one wrote down when you switch something, it can be a problem because you're like, why are we bombing this year? It's like, well, actually we're up because we're looking at a different metric. So I know that's like, I agree with everything else that's been said, like COVID is problematic. Supply chain is a problem. The workforce not being like Kenyan is absolutely true. Find a good mentor. I still talk to like 3 of my mentors to this day. But in the weeds, data integrity, it will be an issue for you in your career.
And I'll say, Brian, adding on that, the lack of data, a huge part of my business is kids, and there's a variety of data collection privacy rules around collecting data, for kids. And for us, it's about how do you reach your target consumer, and how do you get in front of them and convince them to buy the things that you want them to buy, or engage in the experiences that you want, when you have, the absence of what that kind of pure data would be coming from media sources. And so how do you conduct the right research to understand that consumer, knowing that you're going to have no real personal information about that consumer? So data, I think, is one that I think we can probably all say is important, but also probably one of the biggest challenges.
Which is why jobs like what you have, Lauren, exist, right? Because you're bringing the data and providing the insights into actually actionable fashion back to the business to drive that brand strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting what Adam was talking about with kids, because we obviously care about the youngest generations in terms of their sports fandom, but there is such a gap in knowledge in terms of the actual analytics that we oftentimes speak one-on-one with kids, obviously with the permission of their parents, to help bridge that gap. But everyone cares about, it's not even about Gen Z anymore, it's Gen Alpha and what they're doing. And yeah, it's fascinating to study generations.
It truly is. And I think we have a couple of psych majors here that have translated that, degree into what they're doing today. International studies, psych, econ, a little bit of everything, right? But, I want to shift this too into how did your undergrad at Kenyon and the work that you did there really help grow your experience into the worlds that you're working in today? I know, Lauren, you touched on kind of being prepared as the corporate world being a little challenging, but looking at, your past experience and then what you're doing now, what helped you, what did set you up for success?
Yeah, and I can start. I failed to mention that I was a econ major, studio art minor. And that combination of skills really is crucial to what I do now, because I obviously dig into a lot of numbers, but if you cannot translate those numbers to something that is meaningful for someone, it doesn't matter at all. So sort of the storytelling that is bolstered by, design and data visualization, and just general communication is super important. And I think that's probably something that everyone on this panel would say is Kenyon really enables your both written and verbal communication in a way that maybe some other institutions don't. Even at, in my art classes, we would be pushed to verbalize why we did the things that we did. And that becomes probably the most important skill that I have in my job right now, communication.
What about everyone else? How did your experience help?
I'll just add to that. I mean, I think the focus on being well-rounded to me was the piece that was most important. And, my job is not one thing, and it's evolved significantly over, I've been at Hasbro for 13 years, and sort of like the rigors and the expectations have evolved. It's very different what I do today versus what I did when I started. So I think that side of Kenyon, like I never thought that, taking an editing course and learning how to use Photoshop would be an important skill until I was making social posts for a brand years ago, and we needed to get something over to the New York Times, and no one was around because it was late on a Friday, and we have half-day Fridays. And so I was Photoshopping and editing it for something that the Times was going to run. So you kind of never realize some of the skills you're going to learn that are going to be important. The other side is the psychology piece. If I could go back and do Kenyon again, I'd be a psych major again. I think understanding consumer behavior, understanding motivation, and understanding the people around you's motivations, maybe even more important sometimes than the consumer you're going after, to me was one of the most critical skills that I've learned, like being able to sit in a room, read a room, and understanding what people are trying to get out of that, so you can tailor, your conversation, your presentations, whatever it may be. I think psychology is a great major for anyone that wants to go into the world of marketing. We don't think that it translates perfectly, but I actually think it's one of the best majors to kind of translate into a business degree.
So I was a Spanish major. Oh, go ahead, Geoffrey. Take this one.
No. You go. I'll wait.
Okay. So when I was in Kenya, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And then I went abroad as a Spanish major. When I came back, I applied for an internship at American Greetings. And they happened to be looking for a Spanish major or someone that spoke Spanish. And so I got hired, which was awesome. But for me, it really clicked that I wanted to do marketing. That was my first true experience with digital marketing. I was like, I want to do this. And I don't think I would have gotten that internship had I not spoken Spanish. So I was looking at how people were updating MSN. I'm going to date myself here. I was looking at how people were updating MSN Messenger gifts into Spanish and what they were saying. And then should we take that data and make it into Spanish gifts that they could use for MSN Messenger? Which is looking back on it, it's a big responsibility for an intern. They're like, you speak Spanish, go for it. Have fun. And I was like, okay, cool. Here we go. And I think I made the recommendation to make Spanish gifts because I was like, they're 40% of your total usage is people updating these into Spanish. Make it easier for the customer. But that was my introduction to marketing in a digital space. And I was like, this is what I want to do. So here I am, right? However many years later.
For me, I was international studies major, and I think I was the first class that they actually had that. I don't know if they still do, but and my area of focus was Japan. So coming out, I was just desperate to find a big company that would train me and send me to Tokyo and pay for me to go over there. And I sort of fell into it. I was deciding between finance and commodities trading, and ended up meeting some folks from a big advertising agency, and they were like, you got to come here because our office in Tokyo is exploding, and I spoke Japanese, and so they trained me for a bunch of years in Chicago, and then sent me over there, and that was sort of the foundation of my career. And so I think it's really about, as you take your Kenyan education, which is, it's great that it's well-rounded. What I found is that the writing side of things and communications is extremely important, and no matter what business you're in, or what you're trying to tackle. And I find that the liberal artsies or the Kenyan grads do it very well. And then it's about building a foundation, trying to find what's that first step. And everybody's going to have a bunch of twists and turns in their career. So don't be afraid of that, but just make sure that you're always building a foundation.
Geoffrey, do you still speak Japanese? And Brian, do you still speak Spanish?
Oh, for me, I can still hear it, and I do speak it a little bit if I'm in a restaurant or with my friends in Japan, if we're going back and forth. But my reading and writing has fallen off, and I haven't kept that up. But it's been quite some time.
Understandable.
If you
Brian,
ask
what
my
about you?
resume, I am still proficient in Spanish. So I'll go with I'm proficient in Spanish.
I would say the same,
That's
and I
good.
spent every semester studying Spanish, despite them not having a Spanish minor at the time. But thanks. Just curious, as that's obviously a skill that you have and can translate into your, Brian, even as you mentioned, and Geoffrey, with these specific roles that you've had that helped you get into the jobs that you're doing today. It's always interesting how linguistics come into that.
Well, it's also, I think what's interesting about linguistics, and I think especially going to psychology and consumer behavior, is that when you study another society or culture or language and sociolinguistics, in depthly and intensely, whether you're doing a junior year abroad or semester abroad, or you're going over there to live and work, you learn so much more about your own culture in your own community and what go in. And so you just have it just gives you a different perspective. And especially when it comes to consumer behavior, because we all, all these cultures and countries behave differently with products. And I spent a lot of time doing a lot of international work. And when you can find, and everybody can point out the differences, but when you find the similarities, and this is even when I talk about people who are foreigners coming here to work here, especially in the communications and marketing industry, is that use your knowledge of what you think America is, but be open to some really different things. And I tend to try and coach them and say, don't think of the US as one country, think of it as a group of city-states. You look at the direct marketing areas. I mean, because San Francisco is very different than Miami. That's different than Chicago. That's different than the greater New York area. It's different than, some of the areas in Texas. I mean, here in California, just think about the difference between San Diego and San Francisco, let alone Orange County and LA. They're right next to each other. And they're big, areas with large populations. So from a marketing and a research perspective and consumer communications, it's you have to think about that and know it. And studying a foreign language or a foreign culture in depthly helps you understand that better. You can see it. It just things highlight. They just get highlighted to you. So some thoughts.
Adam, did you want to jump in with anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Did Lauren and Adam, did you guys go abroad at all?
Yeah,
Yep.
I went to Australia. I went to the University of Melbourne. It was a great experience. I think I enjoyed it more from sort of like a stepping out of my comfort zone standpoint rather than tapping into, classes that linked back to my major or anything like that. I also played field hockey at Kenyon, and I was able to play field hockey in Australia. And that was a really great experience because in some ways I interacted with more Americans than I wish I had. And that field hockey team really grounded me in the actual country that I was in and linking up with locals and really taking that leap into the culture as Geoffrey was talking about.
Yeah, I was the same, Lauren. I went to Spain, studied in Madrid, played lacrosse at Kenyon and in Madrid. And that was when I met like the majority of the locals in Spain. And that was also the beginning of going back. And I think I've been there now 7 or 8 times for work because we have an office in Valencia and we did some partnerships with a stop motion company in Spain. So I got to use a little bit of that Spanish, but I do not have it on my resume because I would not want anyone to ask me.
It's been a while.
It's been as my Spanish teacher at Kenyon said, you're not very good at Spanish.
Clearly that's held true in your brain for a while, but hey, you still got that knowledge. And I mean, who would have thought that coming full circle to where you are now, Adam, that you're going to Spain and having those interactions and being able to understand, some of the language still because of what you learned. So that's pretty great. I'll tell you, from my experience, I too came out of college in an economic downturn, not knowing what I was going to do with my studio art and anthropology degree, but got an offer as an intern unpaid for 6 months, driving about an hour and a half away from my house to the other side of town to work in the women's professional startup soccer league. And, I did video art and graphic design because that's what I studied in college. And then moving into this role with an internship position, they opened up after 6 months a marketing manager role. So I literally jumped right into teaching myself how to go from what I sort of knew in, what I learned at Kenyon into translating that into an actual role where I had to deliver, graphics and video production for the company, and then getting into, okay, now social media is becoming a marketing tool. So here's this thing called Twitter. How do you use that and really, help sell a company at the time that didn't have Megan Rapido, Carly Lloyd, and all these great names to it yet, because we still were just a logo. And so there's a lot of grassroots marketing, a lot of in the know, using my soccer knowledge from playing at Kenyon and whatnot, and then getting into the space that, I mean, was really a couple of years after that, I was offered through Twitter a job to join Weber Shandwick on a global PR agency team because I was a liberal arts major. My boss went to Carleton and she said that I picked you out of everybody that was, applying for these roles. And I wanted you to come join because I knew two things about you. And it was one, that you could write, and that two, you could apply yourself. And so thinking beyond the more traditional Big Ten school business and marketing majors that have every PR job known to, human today, she saw that in me, and she saw my ability to apply myself and network, and ended up reaching out and got me that opportunity. So very similar, I think, to what you guys are doing. And I know that we talked a little bit about how your experience applies to your career, but what are some of those skills that you really realized that set you up for success and into the roles that you had today? I know we talked about psych and a little bit of how that plays into it. Any other thoughts around that?
I mean, I think I said mine, but mine's pretty direct. Outside of that, I don't know if there's, the thing about, I find in my career, the thing is, like, even going to business school, there's not really like a direct anything, everything, majority of what you learn and the majority of your grow is going to be through the mentors that you have and, the work that you've done and the partners that you work with. So to me, it's about getting the start. I think that's the number one question I get from Kenyon students is, where do I start? And I remember leaving Kenyon and had no clue, and just, at the end of the day, you start somewhere, because where you start is probably not where you're going to end. But, I think Kenyon students are probably generally pretty resilient. You guys left in an economic downturn. I went to business school during one. So, to me, it's really just about continue to be resilient and look for opportunities. And then from there, I always lived by the mantra at Hasbro of just say yes. And that saying yes to new opportunities and different things, realizing that I didn't have the answers to everything, sort of led me to some pretty cool jobs, Monopoly, Play-Doh, now NERF. Like, I've gotten some fun roles by sometimes just saying yes to things that at the time I had no clue what they would be.
Yeah, I would generally agree with that. I would say most of what I've learned has been on the job training, but I was able to be nimble to be trained because of my Kenyan experience. But at the same time, like, I took statistics classes, I took econometrics, like, I learned how to use programming language that I use, but it's a constant evolution. So Kenyon's a great starting place, but so much of what you're going to learn in the business world is really learned here, I would say. Also, just a funny anecdote, I think I took the same art digital imaging class as Adam, and I used those InDesign Photoshop skills to do a similar exercise. Like, no one was around, we needed an advertisement created, and I was like, I think I can do this. And you do it because you kind of had the basic skill. So you never know what's going to be transferable.
It's interesting because I'm a little bit further on in my career than some of the rest of the gang, and so I've hired a lot of people over the years, and especially in Hollywood, whether it's a director or talent or a writer, there's a lot of people that sort of come up and they did all the right things, they went to all the right schools, and they're sort of this. But I always look for people that were slightly different, that were going to bring a different perspective to the table. That had, maybe gone and hitchhiked through Indonesia or done some sort of interesting, different program and come at it differently. And I think a lot of times the people that have done that have come from liberal arts backgrounds. They didn't go to USC film school. They, came out of Middlebury or Kenyon or someplace like that, and they've done something different. So, always try and find a way to make yourself stand out, something unique, something different, because you'll bring that perspective to the table. And I think it's like when as a manager, as a CEO, and you're building teams, I've always tried to build teams of diverse people, especially in this day and age, with what we've been through in the last few years. But I've been doing that since, for a very long time. And it's not because you want to fulfill quotas or anything. It's because you want those perspectives at the table when you're trying to solve a problem, or you're trying to create a campaign, or you're trying to create a television show or a film. It's like you want those perspectives at the table. So find a way to make yourself stand out. Do something different. Do something unique. And I think that will help, in your career as you go forward.
I agree with everything that's being said right now. I think one of the greatest things from a Kenyon college attendee is your just curiosity. So once you get in the door, ask questions, right? Like in digital marketing, everything is tied to each other. So if you get an internship as a social media intern, ask questions about on-site optimization. You're driving people to the landing pages, talk to them about form conversion. It's a very natural conversation to have with that team, that group of people. You'll learn something, and you might find that, maybe I don't like social media so much, but I love on-site optimization. I do it all in digital, but my favorite thing is email marketing. I love it. I can't get enough of it. I look at how people are tracking UTM parameters from emails that they send out. I look at all the tracking. I want to test it. But I see how that all ties to everything else, and how you're doing, personalization on sites, how they tweaking it. Once you get in, ask questions, be curious. There are a million things out there for you to keep learning. Go to HubSpot. They have an academy. Get a certification. Just go through it. Learn something. There's so many resources now to get you to pique all of your interest, to see what speaks to you and what you want to do. And I think that helps you get into a door, because getting in is hard, but once you're in, it opens up everything else for you.
So we didn't cover this in our panel prep, but I think it came up, and it's sort of alluding into this, the answers that you guys just provided. But mentorship, that's a big thing. And it's I like to think I have a personal board of directors who I go to in different capacity, where, not all are traditional mentors. Some are more sponsors, some are, professional leaders I look up to. And like you mentioned, Geoffrey, I try to stay close to them, but there have been plenty over the years that have dwindled away as roles change and people move on or things happen. But curious, from your standpoint, gang, how have you found mentors and connected and stayed with them over the years to help accelerate your career?
I'll say one of my favorite mentors was our CEO, Brian Goldner, who unfortunately passed away last year. But phenomenal resource for me over the span of about 8 years. We met every single quarter, talked about every part of the business, helped me think about how I would think about the business when I got to that level. Was the first person that took me on a lot at a major studio. And I'll never forget, my favorite story about him was, we were in this room, heads of the studio, our executive team, and I was going to go sit on the side. At the time I was running the My Little Pony business, and Brian pulled up a chair, put it next to him, and said, sit right here and we can chat during the meeting. So throughout the entire meeting, he was basically like, here's what's going on, here's the decisions we're making right now. But to me, it's having mentors that are willing to sort of put you right there in the middle and kind of bring you into the fold. To me, that was, one of the most magical things that I've remembered in my career. And to then be able to have those conversations afterwards and continue to learn. I think if you can, I think to Geoffrey's point, getting mentors outside your industry is incredibly important, but then also getting those leaders that can help you think differently about the future, not just the people that are right above you. To me, that was critical to the success I've had at Hasbro.
I'd add, as I kind of stumbled my way through corporate America early on and was trying to figure out how things worked, I went the route of assigned mentors. The companies that I've worked at have had mentorship programs. I would say I had less success connecting with people that way. and more success just if I was in a really big meeting where there were cross-functional teams and someone stood out to me, like they said a lot of smart things, or they were really well spoken, or they had a unique perspective. I would message them on Slack or email them after the meeting and say, hey, this is who I am. I'd love to talk to you more. And that was a lot more successful for me than some of those more forced interactions that I had.
I'll talk a little bit about early in my career. It's at the Leo Burnett Company. There was, in Chicago, 2,000 people in one building. It was a big advertising agency. And actually, Adam Bryant worked there as well, and I knew him there. What I did was, so there was a group of us that were sort of internationals, even though we were from America, and we were supposed to be being sent out to the outer offices. We actually created a group to interact with upper management, and we just created it. We called it the Foreign Legion. And every quarter we would have sort of casual get together, and we would do various different activities. But what it did is it fostered our ability to meet with and sit with senior management in a way that it was not, it was more of a casual way. It was not like, oh, we're in a meeting and I'm presenting to them. It was, hey, give me some, there was a way for us to reach out to them and ask questions about the business and learn. So we actually created a mechanism. There was 2 or 3 other people with myself in order to get us to interact with the senior management. And I think as young people coming in, don't be intimidated, because most of these senior managers really want to talk to you. It's like, don't be afraid of them. Just find a way and be smart about it. And chances are they'll be very receptive 9 out of 10 times.
That's a good point, is that people want to talk and they want to share their stories and they want to share like their help. I've never been denied an informational interview or like reaching out to another coworker. I worked at US Bank, which has 76,000 employees. Anytime I reached out to someone's like, hey, you're working on something that's pretty interesting. Like, can we just meet and talk about it? I want to like pick your brain about like why you're doing it. Never did I hear like no. They're like, yeah, let's set up some time, we'll talk. And then, there's a person that I can talk, pick their brain. And, if we have a full-fledged like mentorship partnership, great. If we don't, I still got an opportunity to pick someone's brain for 30 minutes. And that's great.
Totally agree. All right. So if you could mentor your younger self while at Kenyon to help shape what you're going to be doing in the future, what's something that you wish you could have told yourself then that you know now?
Enjoy it. You have so much fun at Kenyon. Like, I think so many people, I meet with so many people that are like, I did this internship and this. I'm like, yes, internships will make your life so much easier afterwards. And if you get a great internship, they're certainly the gateway to jobs. But I got to tell you, like, I would say you have so much time to work. Enjoy Kenyon because it's an amazing place. It's a lot of fun. And I wouldn't dwell too hard on like every single thing you do and what it's going to mean for your career. I went to Kenyon thinking I was going to go to culinary school afterwards, and it was just sort of a stop on the way. And played lacrosse and had a great time. So it didn't have much of an impact on the future. And I think also that people are so concerned about grades. If you want to go to business school, yes, grades are important, but you get to a certain point in your career, and no one has asked me for my GPA for 14 years. So, for everyone that did much better than me at Kenyon, I don't know that their GPAs are doing much better than me now.
I would say take a psych class and take a stats class.
Can you elaborate why?
Well, I mean, I think Adam kind of hit the nail on the head with just being psych. It's important to be able to read people and the psychology of like why they're doing what they're doing. And then I think a stats class is just so you can take those raw numbers and turn it into like the number of people I meet that don't understand percentages in my day-to-day scares me a little bit. but I think it's important to understand like what these percentages mean and like how much growth you're talking about. I mean, at the end of the day, like we're all in business. You know, your leadership wants to see, are you driving business? Are you making the company more money? It's nice to talk about community, and like when I was in social, I was like, you got to build a community. You got to, like, yes, that's great, but at the end of the day, like how many people are converting on the landing pages and the things that you're doing, and being able to run an A/B split test and understand like which one won and why. That's important, and that's going to be part of your job. Stats and psych will get you there.
So I'll dovetail off of that because I'll give the opposite recommendation. I would say if I were going back and doing it, there would be courses that I would take. Maybe they're art courses or photography or just courses that really push your limit about, push you to think creatively and create. Because really that sort of creative thinking, that out of the box thinking, find ways to push your limits on that. Because no matter what you end up, and this is sort of a panel on marketing, right? No matter what you end up doing, you need to be solving problems and you need to be thinking creatively about how to do that. And anything that can push you out of your comfort zone, I think is really important, because then you have to creatively problem solve. Some people are gifted writers and born copywriters. Some people are gifted and born art directors or film directors or script writers. But even if you're not that, the ability to think laterally and to think and approach something from a different perspective, I think is extremely useful no matter what career you choose or what path you end up on. In any of the courses that can, if you're a psych major or math major or econ major or international studies, anything, you focus, but take stuff outside of that will like make you step out of your comfort zone. And because you can do it in college, and it's like, even if you don't do well at the class, it's going to give you a different perspective.
Yeah, I agree with just be really exploratory, although I can also give a nod to Brian because I do work in research and I understand how important numbers are. So I respect both sides of these answers.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in with, there was nothing I would change about my experience at Kenyon. I had fun. I took classes that challenged me and made me think creatively. Very satisfied with how I did and how I came out of that and applied myself into roles that I never would have thought I was going into. But that stretching opportunity, obviously college is that in general for most people, but the ability at Kenyon to really have that chance to take classes. I know I took Spanish literature and an English course I never would have imagined that I would have taken, but it happened to be offered by a brand new visiting professor, and she was incredible. And I took an econ class with an amazing professor as well, and I absolutely stunk at it, but it helps me do my job today as I run all of our business and financials for our entire department. And I am not a math person, obviously, right brain, studio art, that's where my main jam is. But I think looking back, it's like, of course, have fun, network, join clubs. I think Callie chimed in with something that I appreciated, because getting involved in what you do and knowing how that can translate to your business success, but also your professional development and networking capabilities. I think even being an extrovert myself, there are many times, especially when I was fresh out of college, that I went into a big room with a lot of sports professionals, mostly white men in suits, and I didn't know how to introduce myself or become relevant in the conversations they were having. But I just kind of like swallowed my pride and thought, I'm here, I'm showing up, and I'm applying myself to the situation and making the best of it. And had some amazing conversations and job opportunities and relationships come out of that. So you just never know. But I think everything you guys have said has been really, insightful, and I appreciate it greatly. So I'm going to shift a little bit to see, we have a little bit under 10 minutes left. Do we have any questions or stories or thoughts from the audience that you guys would like to either come off mute and share or include in the chat? Feel free to chime in if you do. If not, we'll keep moving. All right. Yes, go ahead, Daniel. I think you're raising your hand.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a question about, I guess, being a digital marketer and being in communications more broadly during like this time of when organizations and corporations and institutions are facing a lot of crises and there's greater demands for, CSG or CSR and ESG, and corporations are like continually finding themselves like facing a lot of crises, and they can find themselves particularly in a problem with or in conflict with their mission. And I was thinking of this in light of like some of the Kenyan news, given that it is a Kenyan panel, and some of the institution's decisions around the student workers and their decision to organize a union drive. And I was wondering what your thoughts are, particularly on the marketing side, on the challenges of navigating a corporation and an organization through a crisis of mission.
Great question, Daniel. Thank you. Does anybody want to chime in?
I mean, I'm happy to chime in. I hate silence.
I think you probably have a lot of similar, experience with crises and whatnot that you can provide, Adam.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to comment on the Kenyan piece. I'm not close enough to it, nor I work for Kenyan. So I'll leave the Kenyan team to comment on that. I can talk about, for us, I think the most important thing is to align your mission and vision with what you want to represent to the community. We just went through an exercise in NERF where we rewrote our mission and vision, really thinking about where we want to be in the future. And then we made sure that our entire team, NERF is about 65 people domestically and another 20, 30 people abroad, but realigning everyone around that mission and vision and making sure that, everything we do, every social post, every piece of content supports that. And I think you'll continue to see, what that looks like. But at the end of the day, I think you have to make sure that everything you're doing aligns to your mission and vision. So if there's a conflict there, you're going to end up resolving one side of it. You're either going to resolve the content side or you're going to resolve the mission and vision. But I haven't necessarily seen a case, at least, at Hasbro, where we're in major conflict. I think we're really clear about who we're going after and, what we're trying to achieve. And, for us, it's the importance of, entertainment and play in kids' lives. And so we sort of just live that every single day. And CSR, incredibly important, but I think it's also about how you adapt, right? We're in an industry that's heavily plastic related. And so we've stated some certain corporate goals around reducing plastic out of our packaging, and then also introducing, the first ever environmentally friendly Mr. Potato Head. So, I think you can do both, but also really being transparent. We have a massive audience at Hasbro, and being transparent around what your objectives are and that you're not going to solve it today, but you're working towards it for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can chime in with a little bit of our POV for McDonald's. We too have recently, over the last 5 years, reinstated our brand positioning and really try to move the needle on trust. With 70 million customers per day, that's very challenging across 120 markets. But at the end of the day, right, that we feel everybody has a McDonald's story. If you're a fan of McDonald's, you've been to McDonald's, you went to birthday parties there, you ate there on Sundays with your grandma, you go to, baseball community meetings or recognitions, right? There's a way to connect with McDonald's that resonates with everyone. When you talk about ESG or CSR initiatives, it's really hard to tangentially land that when you're talking about fries and burgers in a restaurant. So we have a global impact organization that's made up of communications, media, PR, people, HR, you name it. It's a huge organization and department within our larger corporate business, and even a sustainability and CSR team, right? So we, over the last 5 to 10 years, have literally created teams that are focused on exactly what your question is about. We have every type of crises you can imagine. I have millions of customers per day and week contacting us with their issues or complaining about corporate this, that, or the other decided on this, story. So then it impacted my loyalty to the business, and now I'm not a retained customer, yada, yada. It goes on, right? For us, it's that connection on a one-to-one level at the restaurant. And, sometimes we do have people that walk away as fans of McDonald's because of the stance that we've taken on certain initiatives, or the scale for good, quota that we're trying to reach by a certain year. But our job as storytellers and marketers is to really communicate out what that is, so that our day-to-day customer in the restaurant is able to understand that we are doing these feel good marketing or feel good moments, making it easy for everyone, which is our positioning, that allows them to feel good about the food and the quality of what they're eating. And so there are always times that those crises pop up, but it's how do you turn in an instant, again, apply yourself and really try to change the negative into a positive in the right way for your brand, and pivot as fast as you can on something that could not only be detrimental to your brand as a whole, which is a little harder for us because we do have some great affinity today, but then not impact your stock price or other things that come into the matter as well, or your positioning with your board of directors is in addition to that. So it's a complicated answer. There's a lot to it, but I think it was a really poignant question. So thank you for chiming in. We have one quick question that I saw come through from Marley, and we have a couple of minutes if anybody wants to jump in. But many of you mentioned you look for unique individuals, the atypical choice when hiring, because you admire those that are different and have an eclectic past. How did you convince companies and people when you were interviewing why they should look at you as a liberal arts student versus the more typical choice? Does anybody want to provide any answers to that?
Jump in on that a little bit. I think it's not only about reflecting your personal endeavors and accomplishments, but it's also taking the time to do the research into the company or the person who's hiring as well, and really think critically about that business or that company and what you can bring, and maybe offering an off-the-wall idea, or just being really inquisitive and asking good questions at the end of the interview. So I think some of it has to do with thinking about yourself and how you want to relay yourself, but also putting in the time and effort to think about how you can impact the business as well.
Anyone else?
I think, I probably talked a lot about this, but, for me, it's always been about, okay, I think that's really astute. It's like, know your audience, right? Know who you're talking to. And you have to be genuine about how you present yourself. Don't make stuff up, because people will see through that. Be smart, but know who you're talking to and know what problems they're trying to solve or issues they're facing. Is it a CSR issue, or is it a business issue, or is it a human issue? And know what that business is all about, but definitely know who you're talking to and who your audience is.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. It was a very engaging discussion. I hope you all got something out of it. Panelists, anything else you'd like to end on? A note of anything while we head off?
The Kenyan network's very robust. Use it to your advantage.
Retweet. All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to connect with us through the Alumni Network and also on LinkedIn, but appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.